John McDonnell.
I'll try and be brief as possible so others can come in. I just want to make one specific point before I come on to the general point to reinforce what my honourable friend has said. On this specific point, I'm a champion for Action for ME, the myalgic encephalomyelitis campaign. They've written to a number of us, I believe, who've emphasised the concerns that they've got with regard to the PIP assessments and how narrow it is, and as a result of that, sufferers from ME lose the ability to access the relevant benefits themselves. They're simply asking for the Minister to commit to what the previous Minister was, which was to meet with them so that they can work and co-produce a system to enable them to have full access. I dealt with the first ME case about 25 years ago, and it was then when it was refused to be recognised. There was a lot of stigma attached to it. These people have been sufferers in the quiet now, and I think it does behove the government now to sit down with this group and work through the process from here on in. I want to take up where my honourable friend has left off with regard to the impact that this system has on individuals at the moment. Some who were at the Select Committee may recall the evidence that was provided with regard to Michael O'Halloran. Michael O'Halloran was a case I dealt with 10 years ago. I met his family, the lovely Anne-Marie and Declan. He was a person who had suffered mental health difficulties, had attempted suicide already, then was assessed, declared fit for work and couldn't cope with it, and then committed suicide. That was 10 years ago. John Pring, some of you will know from the Disability News Service, does an excellent role in monitoring cases and providing information to many of us. He's been monitoring recent cases, particularly in relation to people coming under pressure with regard to universal credit and seeking to apply. And it just gave 3 examples in this last couple of years, really. I'll just give you brief details on them. I won't use any names. A disabled woman left traumatised by daily demands of universal credit took her own life. Days earlier, she'd been told she would need to attend a face-to-face meeting with a work coach. She'd shake and cry every time she had to log on to a universal credit journal, which she had to do every weekday to check whether she'd received instructions and avoided a sanction. She'd already had a 6-month sick note from her doctor explaining she was not fit to work, but she was expected to go through the whole process itself, and she couldn't cope with it. The DWP were told about her mental distress. They were told about her suicidal thoughts and the fear of the department. She took her own life. There was another suicide just months after that. Someone who had a long history of depression and anxiety had been engaging with mental health services. He'd been detained under the Mental Health Act. He was then discharged. A psychiatrist saw him on 2 days before he took his own life, and he told the inquest that psychiatrist said he believed the anxiety had been exacerbated by the whole process of the universal credit applications itself. Another one, 2023, died a month after taking an overdose that caused irreversible damage to her liver. The coroner didn't believe she intended to take her own life, but nevertheless the coroner wrote a prevention of harm report to the DWP, highlighting how the DWP itself had failed in its duty to maintain protection. The reason I raise these is because John Pring and others had to go to a Freedom of Information access point. He took a Freedom of Information Act to get a report that was produced by the Prime Minister's Information Unit on the very issue of the harm caused by this process and the suicides that were taking place. It was 4 years before that report was produced. It had been covered up within the PMIU and prevented from publication itself. That report, actually, a number of us had been calling for on the floor of the House of Commons and been denied access to it. And the reason we were calling for it, because in the report there were certain recommendations being made about the duty of care that the department had to these particular people when they were identified as vulnerable, and certain specific actions were needed to be put in place. I believe there's a further reports that, again, I believe should be produced, and there should be full openness and transparency on all of this. I commend DPAC, Disabled People Against the Cuts, have been running a campaign year in, year out about this issue, basically saying when it comes to disability benefits for PIP, the work capability assessment, the application process on the universal credit, the pressures that people are put under, it's putting lives at risk. And what Anne-Marie called for, which I think is right now, we need a statutory duty of care placed upon the department with regard to vulnerable people in particular. And actually, on the level of harm that's been done by the department, I do believe now also, I agree with Anne-Marie and others, that there should be an independent public inquiry into the harm that's been created, certainly over the last 14 years, by the brutal way in which benefits have been administered, particularly those who are particularly vulnerable with mental health problems.
Yeah.